Welcome to Class 5 of the 100 level beginning beekeeping course. Today we're going to go back over integrated pest management briefly, talk about the tasks required to install packages and nucleus colonies. We're looking about the challenges that you have ahead as a new beekeeper. And then we're going to talk about annual management tasks and techniques. So I just want to reiterate, because I think it's one of our most important points, that a strong colony in a small hive might be a weak colony in a larger hive. Part of what we will talk about today is right-sizing the hive. It's also your first step in integrated pest management. So the cycle of pest management starts with prevention. Keep strong colonies. It means you're going to make sure that there's good brood production, adequate nutrition, and a young queen. Then you're going to right size your hive. You're also going to limit disease transmission with where your apiary is set up, setting it up in such a way that bees don't move from one colony to another in a thing called drift. Avoid introducing robbing, because those robber bees might be carrying all kinds of diseases, especially if they've recently robbed out other weaker colonies. Isolate your apiary to the extent that it's possible, not always so in an urban apiary. And you're going to practice good hygiene. It means you're going to clean your tools and your gloves, and you're not going to use a tool at your mentor's apiary and then use it again at your apiary without first washing it off with isopropyl alcohol or sticking it down inside your smoker for just a minute while it's nice and hot. Not so long you lose the temper, though. A weak tool is no fun. And then any questionable equipment, any stuff that's in your hive, you're gonna that doesn't look right, you're gonna pull it out, process it, clean it up. And then anything that is anybody else's colonies, if it looks questionable, you're certainly not going to use it. And then you also want to make sure that you are ensuring good ventilation. You want to place your colonies on a hive stand well off the ground, and have them in a place where the air will blow through, and that it's not like the low spot in your yard that accumulates water. So last week we went over the pest management cycle really fast. That was for prevention. We just talked about that. Keeping strong colonies, limiting disease transmission. Then you're going to monitor. You're going to do regular checks, and you're going to keep good records. And then if you discover that there's something that needs to be done, you're going to do it. You're going to apply the treatment or do the activity. And then you're going to go back and see whether it was successful or not. You're going to retest and compare results from your monitoring phase. And then you're just going to keep doing that. So integrated pest management is a decision-making process, pest and host interactions. You're going to look at your thresholds, and then you're going to think about all the different approaches you can have and put them in the correct order so that you're going from like the most light cultural intervention to the heavier and then the heavier interventions. But at the end of the day, whatever you choose, it should be safe, it should be profitable, and it should be environmentally friendly. So your IPM criteria, you have to know the life cycle of the pests as well as the host, know the seasonal rhythm of the pest, determine when the pests are most susceptible to treatment, and then know exactly how many you can have at any given time, or how much of that issue you can absorb without treating it, and then make your decisions about when you're going to treat. So you have to identify the problem, figure out what your thresholds are for that problem, whatever it is. Yeah, make sure that you assess your options, go through and really think about all of the possible things that you could do, line them up, put them in order. Then you're going to make sure that you're doing your monitoring and so when we're talking about thresholds and when you're going to treat, we're just going to look really quick at Varroa as your sort of test case here. You want to know the life cycle of your host, how much brood there will be in the frames at any given time, and the life cycle of your pest, what the number is in your colony total. You have to think about the life cycle of your host versus the life cycle of your pest. And this is an example if you have left the hive untreated. Your intervention should be somewhere towards the beginning, well before you get to the economic threshold, at which point it's too late. And you're going to have too heavy a pest load to the number of bees. It's going to be really hard to get that pest load back under control without it impacting your population. So then once it becomes clear that you have to take some kind of an action to respond to whatever issue is in your hive, then you consider what your options are. And you do it in a certain order. You start with your cultural, which is your host resistance or host tolerance of whatever the thing is. If it's not genetically part of the bee, then you have to, beyond that, consider the outside things. So you can do physical. In the case of the mites, you might sequester the queen, put her in a queen sequestration cage and hold her so she can't lay a bunch of brood, which will create a brood break, which will also create a mite break and stop the mite cycle in your hive, or some other way modifying the environment. And then if those controls are not working, or in addition to those controls, you may consider biological controls. So natural enemies, such as applying nematodes. And then once you get past the physical and the biological, then you, and only then, do you consider what options might be available as far as chemical treatments. So let's look at your first getting in the door of actually putting bees in your hive. So you have to get ready for bee arrival, which means you have to build the hive stands, move the stands to the bee yard, face the entrance roughly southeast, or however you have figured you have to face your entrance for your yard space. Level the stands, allowing for settlement. Then you have to place the hive on the stand with the bottom board, one hive body, 10 or 8 frames of foundation, then your inner cover, your telescoping cover, and a couple of bricks to hold the cover down. So when you go to if you purchase packages, when you go to pick up your packages, first of all, if you don't already have documentation, maybe an email or something that explains when this particular colony was created or shook, We need to ask the purveyor. Hopefully they will have spoken with the producer. So 4 to 5 days between shook date and install date for queen bonding, because usually the queen is not the queen of the colony. She is almost always newly mated, hopefully she's mated queen, and you need to leave enough time for the bees in the package to bond to the queen. So if they shake them and ship them and you pick them up the next day, that's not 2 days is not going to be enough time for the queen and the bees in the box to bond. So you'll need to hold on to them as a package for a couple more days. And then follow the directions during the holding period before installation. We'll go over those. And then if you are not at the delivery location on time or have not made arrangements for your bees, you may not be able to get them at all. So you've got to show, if you order a package, whenever the packages come up, because almost always they're coming from somewhere in the south, you just have to be at the location for the pickup and don't be late. Otherwise, that purveyor may hand on those bees to somebody else who wants more or whatever because you didn't show, and you won't get a refund. So the wrangler is responsible for bee delivery. It is your responsibility to arrive on time to the designated pickup location, keep the bees out of direct sunlight, cover top and leave sides open for air, cover the floor at least 3 feet from the package because they're very messy, and do not allow overheating. You don't want them to be too hot or too cold. Like room temperature is fine. Do not install bees immediately upon arrival. Generally, 1, they've been shaken around a bunch, and 2, they may not be bonded to that queen. Give bees transition time of 3 to 4 days, and remember that they are under a lot of stress. Timing and conditions for installation. You want an afternoon temperature. You want to do it in the afternoon. The temperature should be at least 53 degrees, and it should be at least that warm for at least an hour. So watch your weather report. And then while you're holding on to the packages, you want the room to be 58 to 65 degrees, low light. You may stack them, but you want to make sure that that you leave any spacer bars that are on them intact, so that there's plenty of air between the packages if you have more than one. Spray the cage on both sides with water, clean, pure water from a clean, never before used for anything other than water spray bottle. So every couple of hours, give them a little bit of water. And then spray the cage with a little light syrup, so you can put a little sugar in that water and shake it around and spray the cage, the queen cage, the whole cage, the bee cage, package with some light syrup. Observe bees to determine if the feeder is out of syrup. You can also kind of undo there'll be a strap or something over the top. You can kind of pluck it off, and without pulling the can all the way out, you can kind of lift the can a little bit just to see if it's heavy. And then spray with light syrup every couple of hours until nighttime, and then do it all again. And then install after the appropriate waiting period, and make sure you try to install in the afternoon if possible. That'll hopefully give the bees a whole night to settle into your hive. They're less likely to abscond or fly out in the late afternoon. So if you install them in the afternoon, hopefully by morning their smell will be on enough of the stuff that they'll want to stick around. So spray bottle, these are the things you need. You spray bottle with 1-to-1 syrup, hive tool, gallon starter syrup 1-to-1, a feeder, a stapler, and some shorter staples, pollen substitute optional, paper clip for the hold the queen cage in place. Cutter, single razor edge blade, so you can get all the stuff out of the way so you can actually open the package and dump the bees. Some duct tape, your personal protective gear, bee brush, marshmallow, just in case you may need to put new bee candy in the end of the queen cage. I'm gonna have to look and see if she needs more candy for a time release. And of course the hive stand and the bee box and all of that stuff in place, ready to go. Okay, so on installation day, gonna water the bees, you're gonna do that spray mist again early in the day, and then you're gonna move the bees to the bee yard and place the hive in the install position. So you're gonna put everything together, make sure it's all where you want it. You're gonna level, make sure that's nice and level, use some shims, and then remove all the frames. You can number the frames from 1 through 10 or 1 through 8, starting from the left side. That's how we determine the position. Is first position is the first frame on the left-hand side, and the 8th or 10th position is the first frame on the right-hand side. And then spray both sides of all the frames with light syrup. Then you're going to move all your gear and the bees to the hive, put on your protective gear, at least the veil and the gloves potentially. Spray the package bees with the light syrup through the outer mesh of the package box. Remove the wooden cover using your hive tool, and then remove the staples from the cover or bend them over just so that you don't have something with staples sticking up to stab you later, because then you'll need a tetanus shot. And then
that is your queen. So we're going to grab the tab and pull it out. Now this is what your rag is for. So right before you pull out your queen cage, just put the rag down in the hole, and that just keeps all excess bees from flying around. Let's prepare the hive first. I'm going to take the lid, the inner cover off, and we're going to pull out 4 frames. And we're just going to lay them to the side. Here's our queen, and we're going to check and make sure she is alive. Your queen is the largest bee in there. She's going to have a slick, abdomen. And then we're going to take off the transport tab, and we're going to take the cork out of the candy end. And again, make sure it's the candy end because we want to do a slow release. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my paper clip out of my pocket. I'm going to straighten it and make a hanger out of it, okay? So what we're going to do is just going to bend the paper clip so we get like an L shape. And we're going to use this to make a hanger. So we're going to slide this down right beside the candy. We're going to bend it over. It's just going to help support the queen cage to make sure she doesn't fall to the bottom. So I'm just going to spread out a couple frames. I'm going to slide her candy end up in between the 2 frames, pushing slightly on the outside frame so you get a nice tight fit. And then your little paper clip is just to kind of help support to make sure she doesn't tip over. Now comes the exciting part. We're going to put the bees into the hive. Now this may seem intimidating, but it's really not. The bees are coated with sugar water. They're all kind of clumping together. So all we're doing is tapping them to the bottom so that we can release the sugar can and get the bees in the hive. You may think the bees are going to fly up at you, but they're all kind of clumped together in the bottom. This is where the pliers come in. The pliers make it nice and handy to get the syrup can out. We're just going to pull the syrup can out and lay it to the side. And then we're just going to dump the bees. And you kind of, shake to one side, shake to the other side, and just kind of make sure the bees are going into the bottom. You kind of maybe do a little tap and keep shaking, and most of the bees will exit the cage. And then we're just going to lean the cage up to the front of the hive so that as the rest of the bees are leaving, they'll go right in the front with the rest of the hive. And then all we do is just put our frames back in, just being very careful not to bang anything. We're just going to kind of jiggle the frame in, making sure that they're kind of lined up, and inner cover back on, and we are done. It is really that simple.
All right, so you're going to place the package with the hole towards the hive entrance. And then you're not going to lift the box or look in there for 5 days. Eventually, the bees inside the package will go inside of the hive. And day 6, after the install, you're going to open the hive. Remove the queen cage. If the queen is in the cage still, look for another queen. If there isn't any, release her and observe the worker reaction. Check for eggs if bees have released the queen already, and then put more syrup in the feeder if it's needed. So no smoke during the install and first inspection, only light smoke thereafter. Then after the 14th day, check for eggs and larvae. If eggs and larvae are present, feed a fresh half gallon of syrup, button up and get out. If no eggs or larvae are present, call your mentor. Your options are probably going to be to requeen, put a new queen in there, or combine colonies. Something's happened to your queen. So, nucleus colony installation. Again, late afternoon as advised. you have to remember that honeybee colonies are not just plug and play. You can't just dump them in the box and leave them to themselves. Your general challenges are going to be developing awareness of what the bees need and when. You're going to have to adjust your management to the bees, not the calendar. And then the environmental changes require management changes. So whatever is happening in the wider world may require that you have a management response for the bees. In your initial buildup, trying to get the bees built up so that they can go out into the environment and do amazing things. You're going to have to encourage comb production, increase brood production, and make sure that they have an available food supply. The way you're going to do this is all frames about 90% drawn in the first box before you add another one. You're going to rotate the outside frames in. We're going to talk about that. And then you're going to feed syrup and protein until adequate forage is available. And that is for both a package and a nuke, although you will just keep feeding your package. You're beginning feeding it, you'll put some food in there to begin with, similar to the way we fed the nuke. In the video, you're also going to feed the package, so you're going to put a feeder on there. And you're just going to keep feeding them until either they stop taking it or that there's enough forage for the nuke to continue. So continuing growth after that initial buildup is you're going to have to evaluate and maintain your colonies. And then nutrition through the dearth. So at some point, the blooms are all going to go away and you're going to need to start feeding your bees again. So you're going to obtain a baseline mite count. You're going to continue to inspect for diseases and pests, parasites. Can continue to feed if necessary or start feeding again, carbs and protein until adequate forage is available again. If it's the dearth, if it's after the flowering has happened, you're just going to keep on feeding them so that they can build comb, so they can make fat little bees for winter. So how long to feed depends on the colony and the conditions. For a package, prepare to feed all summer, both syrup and protein. So that's both syrup and pollen substitute or local pollen patties. For a nuke, until the forage is available or until during the dearth. And then you're going to evaluate your colony conditions. So challenges, evaluate your queen quality. Is she laying a good brood pattern? Is there a signal that there needs to be food stores laid? So you're going to have to learn how to distinguish eggs, uncapped and capped brood, nectar stores, pollen stores, and capped honey. So open and capped brood, these are pictures. You can see the little tiny eggs, and you can see some brood at different stages, and then you have these capped pupas up in the upper right-hand corner. Then we have here sealed brood. Some of it's open, but most of it's sealed, so they're newly sealing it. That's a fine brood pattern. There's nothing wrong with it. Looks like the queen, looks like there may have been some bees that have already emerged and the queen has laid new eggs. Nectar, it's liquidy, looks kind of runny. Pollen and bee bread. So it has this manna-like graininess. Usually the pollen is pollen colored. So when you finally get to the height of summer, your challenges are going to be continuing the brood and comb production. So you want them to keep building comb and you want them to keep laying eggs. Drought, so there might be some interruptions in the forage, supersedure and or queen loss. And your responses are going to be add additional boxes. And once they draw out that first box, you're going to continue adding boxes with foundations as necessary. And then you're going to resume feeding or continue feeding. And then always look for eggs. Just you monitor your queen's health by just checking to make sure that there's eggs and there's only one egg in each cell. And then watch for queen cells. So they may build queen cups as just a precautionary measure, and then they'll tear them down and then they'll build more. But if they build a queen cup and then they cap it off, it becomes a queen cell, and that's when you should start wondering if there's an issue with your queen. So late into summer, mite populations are going to increase. Small hive beetles might become more of an issue. And your bees may exhibit defensive behavior, mostly due to robbing pressures. So they're going to want you to put the entrance reducer on a smaller size. Monitor mite levels. Don't add more foundation if they aren't already drawing more frames. Make sure that you get in and get out. You don't slop their food anywhere because that'll induce robbing behavior. And then learn to use drapes and quiet boxes. So we just often use a pillowcase for a drape and a quiet box on the side is essentially a box you can slide frames into, and while you're instead of leaning them up on the outside of the hive, you slide them in the quiet box. Throw either the lid or a pillowcase over it, and that reduces the smell that would signal to potential robber bees. So once your colony is mature, it should fill a couple of brood boxes. They should be working on putting away some stores. You want the stores to be backfilled around the brood boxes. And you've done it. Once you get to that point, you've helped your bees make it to the end of the first year successfully, because our bee year begins in August. Because what you do in August is going to have a direct impact on how the rest of the year goes. So if you've gotten to them to the point where they've grown out and you've drawn out a bunch of wax and they've got some food stores and they have a good population by the end of July, then you're doing very well. So here we go. Year 2 and onward. So in order to be successful with your management, you have to get HEP first. What do I mean by HEP first? You have to be aware of when you're going to do all of these different activities. When you will harvest, when you will do stuff involving moving equipment around or repairing or working on equipment, when you will need to feed the bees pollen, when you're going to have to feed them 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 syrup, when you're going to do a brief inspection or whether you're going to do a deep inspection, when robbing might be an issue in your environment, when swarming, swarm control will be important, and then when you'll need to do your treatments. So, to be successful, you have to get HEP first. When do you get HEP first? Well, we'll be showing you this calendar as we go through, filling it out as we go along. So in August, we may potentially, if it's beyond our second year, we may be harvesting. We'll be doing things with equipment basically all year long. We'll be feeding pollen in September, February, March, and April. They'll be getting feed of various types in August, September, October, maybe doing emergency feeding with fondant in December and January, potentially February. February, March, April, and July, we may also be doing feeding. And then when will we be doing our inspections? September, October, March, April, May, and June. We'll have to be conscious and watching out for robbing from June through the end of September. I have to start thinking about swarms, actually March, April, May, June, July, and swarm prevention in those months. And then when will we be doing our treatments? So there's different treatments that happen at different times. Your January, February treatments, those will be the treatments for the oxalic acid vape, and then other treatments at different times. Your early powdered sugar will be March, April, May, June. But then after honey, after July, or during July, August, and September, you're going to make sure that you've knocked back your mite population well and truly good. So August, the beginning. The fall of the first year is really the beginning of the second year in beekeeping. Calendar year runs January through December. Beekeeping year runs August through July. Virginia beekeepers' management in July and August may well determine whether a colony survives the coming winter and emerges in spring in a condition to prosper. And that was old Billy Davis, part of the Sustainable Beekeeping Consortium in Northern Virginia. So why is this? Our DC area colonies need at least half of their total population of field bees at field bee age by October 30th. Continuing counting in reverse, the queen needs to lay these eggs by mid-September. So you have to allow 10 to 20 days variance for weather. If you're going to introduce a new queen, it has to be by August 31st. So autumn eggs develop into winter bees, which become the spring foragers and nurse bees. So in August, you may be harvesting honey if you've been doing this, if you're second year. You'll be doing some things with equipment, like freezing and storing. And you'll be doing some feeding. You feed 1 to 1. I mean 2 to 1. Or 1 to 1, depends on if you need more wax drawn. And if you need to stimulate breed production. You're going to throw on a robbing screen. You're going to test and treat. At this time, queen production shifts into winter bees. Population age shift. Conservation of stores. Pest awareness heightens. Going to tidy up the bee yard. Last late harvest, freeze and store cleaned supers. Take a mite count and if necessary treat. Feed 1 to 1 if needed, but don't overstimulate. Make sure robbing screens are in place. Requeen no later than August 30th. And this is what robbing looks like. It's not very organized and it has a very loud sound. And you'll see the bees at the joints also. So those are robber bees that don't necessarily know that they can't get in on those joints between the boxes. Okay, so in September, combine and consolidate your equipment, freeze and store anything you need to. Winterize, build your windbreaks, maybe still feeding pollen, feeding 2 to 1. This is going to be what they store, additional stores. If it's still really hot in September, you may still be feeding them 1 to 1 and continuing to stimulate the development of winter bees. Going to do an inspection, reduce the entrance, and test and treat. So in October, you're going to throw on your mouse guards, winterize, ventilate, feed 2 to 1, do quick inspections, and then September and October are really your winter preparation. So at this time, you want your colonies will be defensive but strong. You want them to be disease and pest free. Pests like wax moth, hive beetle, and varroa mite and mice are going to be the issues that you're combating at this point. Large late summer population of field bees. Young, productive, mite-tolerant queen is what you want in your hive. Plenty of winter stores. You want to reduce or limit moisture accumulation. So you're going to tilt your hive very slightly forward and make sure the top is ventilated. And then you want 70 to 100 pounds of stored honey and ample pollen in the box. So you're going to inspect the colonies for food and brood. Combine weak healthy colonies into stronger healthy colonies, or put them into a right size by making a nuke. Monitor mite count, treat only if necessary, remove undrawn foundation and empty comb. If the hive has light protein stores, feed pollen as necessary. Feed 2 to 1 into the brood chamber first so that they backfill honey stores around the edges of the brood chamber, and then you can add a super and have them fill that too. And then install your mouse guards before the first frost. Make sure you have a good windbreak and your ventilation is in place. This is not the time to try to catch up. It is impossible at this point. You need to be out ahead instead of running behind. Overstimulation can result in overpopulation, and that will result in depleted stores. Barn burner colonies often do not survive the winter, so if they're overstimulated and still laying too late into the fall, like your Italian bees, will just keep going. They will starve themselves out. The strong, healthy colonies do survive. This is a good time to utilize your mentor's advice. What's going on in your colony? So, to feed or not to feed depends on demands and the reserves. So if you are feeding your bees, you want to monitor the stores, make sure that you're back feeding. So you've taken off any honey super and you're feeding just over the brood box so that they're going to be filling all of the corners of the brood chamber with feed. Monitor the stores and brood frequently. Then once those back corners are filled, you're going to drop another box on there and continue to feed so that they can fill up that additional box. 1-to-1 or 2-to-1? Which one? No, may use a full honey super as extra food for winter. So, in November, going to take stock, clean up the apiary, make sure our windbreaks are in place, and then start planning for spring. It's a straw bale wind block. So December is when you may end up doing some feeding for fondant. So if there's a warm enough period for you to actually break the seal on the hive and peek in the winter, have a look, see. If it seems like they need some food nearby, you can give them some fondant or sugar feed, solid sugar feed at this time. You may also, depending on your level of competency, evaluate if you can move a honey frame closer or not. You might end up repositioning some frames. You're going to do a weight check, simply done by a little tilt. You lift the front of the box or the back of the box and just heft it a little bit to see what kind of weight you're dealing with. You may end up feeding fondant. You may move some equipment around. This is also the time of year when you're going to be bringing your equipment in, all the extra stuff. It's not on the box, on the hive right now, and scraping it all off and cleaning it and repainting and getting everything ready for and ordering new equipment because there's no back orders usually at this time of year. You're going to do some reading. You're going to look back over your notes, go to meetings. So at this time, the last of the summer bees will have died out. The cluster will contract, and they'll start moving up. If they're clustered low in the colony, they'll start moving up and consuming stores as they go. It's really usually too cold to inspect. What to do? Use windows of opportunity to reposition stores closer to cluster, feed fondant. Can't open? Evaluate by weight, a little tilt check to see how heavy it is. Catch up on your reading, go to meetings, and repair old equipment.
12 cups of sugar and 1 cup of water, and I mix it up, and that's it. So 12 parts regular white sugar and 1 part water, and give it a good mix until the sugar is like wet sand. It doesn't need to be gooey, just basically wet. And then I dump it into any kind of container. It could be paper plates, it could be an old chicken wing tinfoil container, something like that. And then I just score it down the middle so that this will eventually make the bricks. So when it dries, it'll just be easier to pop it out because breaking it off when it's solid into smaller pieces is difficult.
Then you just kind of set it in an open oven to dry out most of the way. It's not a snowball. We're feeding fondant. So we're feeding sugar candy. So it's just a bucket with a little sugar. Drop some tiny little bit of water in there, just enough to moisten it. We just used a can to scoop it out and dump it on top of the colony, on top of this newspaper. Put a box over the top of it. Put a lid over the top of that. The bees will come up and consume it. So in January, that's when you may be doing the feeding. You're going to still be working on fixing your equipment and getting everything ready for spring. Warm day, you may reposition or feed fondant. This is when you'll be doing your oxalic acid vapor treatment. You won't be doing it. This is the one treatment where you won't necessarily be testing for mites first. This is the only prophylactic treatment that we encourage. Is if you can make sure that there's no mites in the colony when there's no brood in the colony, you're good to go going into spring. So this is a good time to read and go to meetings. This was using a device a thermographic device, so you can take pictures of heat signatures. Shows you where the clusters are located in these two different hives. So in February, order or build boxes and frames. You may be giving some pollen stores. You may peak if the weather is 45 degrees plus and not too windy. You may still be doing emergency feeding. And if it's really starting to warm up, February is a little unpredictable. If it's really starting to warm up for a while, you may feed 1-to-1. And then you may treat. If it's still cold, if it's still cold, wintry, and there's no brood in the box, you may be doing your oxalic vaping in February. So at this time, winter deadouts, egg laying increases, is when you may see some chilled brood, stores running out, bees starving in place. What to do now? Remove deadouts, clean them up. If treating with oxalic acid, this is the time to do it. Use weather windows to reposition stores or feed sugar. React to any unpredictable weather stresses. Weight check. Feed fondant or transition to 1-to-1. Feed a small amount of pollen, and then have new refurbished boxes ready to go. Because March is coming, and you need to get out in front of any swarm impulses. So add boxes, not necessarily all at once, but if it seems like there's any kind of pressure in the size of the colony, you add a box so that there's no to alleviate that pressure. You may be doing what's called reversing. I'm going to show you what that is. Feeding pollen, again, small amounts. Feeding 1-to-1 to stimulate them to create new baby bees. You may do your spring inspection in March. That's the deep one. That's the one you go all the way down to scrape off the bottom board, or switch out the bottom board if your old bottom board needs to be refurbished. Stick a new one under there, and then you can work on that other bottom board. Test and treat. So now we're doing testing before we do treatments. In April, you're going to add boxes. You may reverse, you may split, you may add pollen, feeding 1-to-1, doing spring inspections, getting out in front of swarm management, testing and treating. So at this time, you're dealing with swarming, unpredictable weather patterns, and stores may run out before the main flow actually starts. So you're going to need to watch those food stores. So evaluate your queen, see how her laying looks, if it's, good number, good pattern. Deep dive inspection, assure adequate room in the brood nest. Stimulate with 1-to-1 and pollen if needed. You may reverse your boxes, so give them food and room above. Add sugar, add a super if needed. So potentially throw on your first honey super, and then consider your spring splits. So you can see these April bees by their heat signature are right up at the top, and that bottom box is almost completely empty. So be prepared with gear on hand. You're going to pull out that bottom box, which means you have to actually lift those two other boxes to the side. Pull out that bottom box, stick those two top boxes on the bottom, and then put that bottom box back on the top. That's called reversing. It's a common practice. Hopefully there will be ample food stores around the cluster, but an empty box waiting on top, and this will make the queen feel like as she moves up, she has plenty of room to go, and there may not be an impulse to swarm. So in May, you may potentially do your very first harvest with that spring ephemeral honey. You may be putting on your queen excluder. You may only be just now putting on your queen excluder. You may be adding your first super. Inspection, swarm management. This is a very productive period. You'll have explosive population buildup, swarming, queen cells, queen cells, queen cells. Nectar is in full swing, and you have to decide if you're going to use a queen excluder or not. It's not necessary. If you have a honey super on there, once they get that first 2-inch layer of honey on the bottoms of all those frames, the queen is not going to go above that. So you can use a honey band as a natural queen excluder also, which is why we love what we call our flex boxes. Take advantage of young bees and nectar flow to draw comb. Adequate room for growing colony, or consider a spring split. So if you want to have more bees in your apiary, this is the time to split out your colonies. Add supers as necessary, so you may be supering up. First honey harvest of the lighter spring ephemeral honeys. And then this is when you're going to train your bees to go through the excluder. This is also when you're going to be acclimating your bees to their water source. When you see your honey lines, you know your swarms are not far behind. And this is a beautiful, fully capped frame of honey. So in June, you may be doing your harvesting, adding a super, queen excluder. It just all depends on the weather. You may be doing brief inspections at this point. You may still be doing robbing management and swarm control. Late swarming, it's harder to recover from late swarming, so you want to make sure that they always feel like they have adequate room to grow. The last super of the season, I'm going to be putting that on in June. Colony scouting and guarding will increase. Mood of the colony changes. They'll usually become a little bit more aggressive. Any surplus honey needs to get pulled, and mite levels will be rising, so you need to make sure you get out in front of testing and treating. Prepare to harvest and extract surplus honey, if any. Freeze and store harvested honey supers. Last of the honey flow, so space pressure, super up or super under, which means that you put a super under the top super. So if you have, say, one super on there, you'll take that one super off and put another super that's empty in between. So you'll have a full super up top, and you'll have an empty super underneath that over the top of the brood chamber. Swarm management, tip check, frame pull. So you're going to be looking for swarm cells. And then aggressiveness. You may need to add a robbing screen or reduce the entrance. And then these are boxes that are being stored. So these are boxes that don't have any honey. These are empty supers. And they are stored on their edges so that the air and the light can get to them. And that way you can minimize the amount of wax moth damage that happens. So you're going to freeze and store anything that has pollen or honey still in it. Place frames in garbage bags and then freeze. Harvest in July. Freeze and store. Reduce your entrances. You're going to be feeding potentially 1-to-1. Brief inspection. Robbing control. Swarm management. Test and treat. Test and treat. Test and treat. Test and treat. Remember this? This is why you need to test and treat. Nectar flows slower stop. Robbing begins. Colony scouting and guarding will increase. Mite levels are rising. And any surplus honey, or is the colony dry? So you need to figure out what you're dealing with. Do they need feeding? Do you need to pull honey supers? This is the time of year when you might pull off, even if you're not going to take the honey and use it, pull off the honey super, freeze and store those frames, and then come back, and later in the year you may give them back that same honey super. Observe forage availability, avoid careless inspection, so you don't want to make any liquid sugar or honey on the outside of the boxes. You want to be fast. Install your robbing screens and entrance reducers. Harvest and extract surplus honey if any. Test and treat for mites. If the colony is dry, feed 1-to-1.